Ambassador Zarakai had witnessed the birth of 17 stars. During her 3-century tenure aboard the Galactic Council Station, she had mediated disputes between species whose evolutionary paths had diverged so dramatically that they could barely comprehend each other's existence. She had overseen the peaceful integration of 43 new civilizations into the Terran Galactic Empire. But never, in all her years of service, had she seen the council chamber in such chaos. The holographic display at the center of the vast amphitheater showed real-time destruction across 17 star systems. Red markers blinked ominously as entire worlds went dark. Their communication networks severed, their orbital defenses reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The Krex hegemony had shattered 5,000 years of carefully maintained peace in a matter of hours. "The Antares colonies are gone," announced Fleet Admiral Thomases, his forearms gesturing frantically at the tactical display. The Quellen's normally pristine blue carapace had dulled to a sickly gray, a sure sign of extreme stress among his species. 70 billion souls, simply diaperized. Their planetary shields lasted exactly 4 minutes against the Krex dreadnoughts. Representative Vinter of the Ashen Republics rose from her crystalline perch, her translucent form shimmering with barely contained energy. "The Empire has grown soft during the long peace. Our defense fleets are ceremonial at best. We have exploration vessels, not warships. The Krex spent centuries preparing for this moment while we debated trade regulations and cultural exchange programs." Around the chamber, delegates from 100 different species murmured their agreement. The Terran Galactic Empire had been built on principles of cooperation, scientific advancement, and peaceful coexistence. War was a relic of primitive civilizations, something to be studied in historical archives, not experienced in reality. Ambassador Zarakai's attention turned to the human delegation, seated in their modest section near the chamber's edge. Humans were relative newcomers to galactic civilization, having joined the Empire only 800 years ago. They were curious creatures, bipedal mammals with remarkably short lifespans but an almost pathological drive to explore and adapt. Most species found them somewhat amusing in their earnestness. The senior human representative, Ambassador Chun Wei-Lin, sat perfectly still while chaos erupted around her. Her expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as she absorbed the incoming reports of destruction. Beside her, General Marcus Stone maintained the rigid posture that seemed universal among human military personnel, his weathered features betraying nothing of his thoughts. "What forces can we muster?" demanded the vegan consortium speaker, a massive creature whose gas-filled bladders pulsed rhythmically as it spoke. "Surely our combined fleets can mount some defense?" Admiral Thos's mandibles clicked in what Zarakai recognized as deep pessimism. "The defense flotillas of the inner worlds amount to perhaps 200 vessels, most designed for patrol duties and planetary surveys. The Krex Advance Fleet alone consists of over 3,000 heavy warships, with reports suggesting their main force is 10 times that size." "Then we negotiate," suggested the Ethereal Collective's representative, its voice emanating from a sphere of pure energy. "Perhaps territorial concessions, resource rights, some form of accommodation. "The Krex do not negotiate," interrupted a new voice. Everyone turned as General Stone rose from the human delegation. His voice carried easily across the vast chamber despite his species' relatively modest vocal capabilities. "With respect to the honored delegates, the Krex hegemony has made their intentions clear. This is not a territorial dispute or a resource conflict. This is conquest." Several delegates began speaking at once, but Stone continued without pause. "My government has been monitoring Krex military preparations for the past 50 years. While the rest of the galaxy focused on peaceful development, they've been building the largest war machine in recorded history. They don't want to rule the Empire, they want to replace it entirely." "Preposterous," scoffed the Andromedan representative, its metallic voice ringing through its translators. "No single species could hope to control the entire galaxy. The logistics alone would be impossible. Unless," Stone said quietly, "they never intended to control it. Unless they intended to simply eliminate it." A stunned silence fell over the chamber. The concept of genocidal warfare on a galactic scale was so far beyond the experience of most species that they struggled to process it. The long peace had produced civilizations of philosophers, artists, and explorers. War, when it occurred at all, was typically small-scale, conflicts over specific resources or territories, the tactical display updated with fresh intelligence. And Admiral Thas's already grim expression darkened further. New reports from the frontier sectors? The Kreks aren't just destroying military targets. They're sterilizing entire worlds, every city, every settlement, every living thing. This isn't conquest, it's extermination. Ambassador Chun finally stood, her movement causing a ripple of attention through the chamber. The Human Federation would like to make a proposal, she said formally. Honored Ambassador, Zarakai replied, grateful for any suggestion at this point. The Council recognizes Earth. My government offers the use of the human colonial marines in the defense of the Empire, Chun announced. We request immediate deployment authorization to establish defensive positions at key strategic points. A murmur of confusion swept the chamber. Most species were only vaguely aware that humans maintained anything resembling military forces. The colonial marines were generally assumed to be some form of planetary police force, useful perhaps for dealing with pirates or natural disasters. With all due respect, the vegan representative rumbled, how many of these Darines does your species maintain? A few thousand? 10,000? Currently deployed and ready for immediate action, Chun replied. Approximately 2 million Marines across 47 expeditionary forces. An additional 8 million can be activated within 72 hours. The silence that followed was profound. Several delegates turned to their advisors, questioning the translation protocols. 10 million soldiers was an incomprehensible number to civilizations that had lived in peace for millennia. Forgive my ignorance, Zarakai said carefully. But human military doctrine is not well understood by the Council. What exactly do your Marines do? General Stone stepped forward, his expression carrying what humans called a smile, though it held no warmth. Ma'am, the colonial marines specialize in exactly this type of situation. When peaceful civilizations face extinction-level threats, when conventional diplomacy fails, when survival itself is at stake, that's when you call the Marines? But surely, stammered the ethereal representative, 10 million soldiers cannot possibly stand against millions of Kreks warships? With respect, Stone replied, that depends on how you define standing against them. The Kreks have spent centuries building a fleet designed to annihilate peaceful civilizations. They've prepared for orbital bombardments, space battles, and the conquest of undefended worlds. What they haven't prepared for is what happens when someone fights back the way humans fight back. The chamber erupted in confused chatter, but Chun raised her hand for silence. The Human Federation formally requests permission to deploy defensive forces to threatened systems. We understand the risks. We understand the odds. But we also understand something that perhaps the galaxy has forgotten during these 5,000 years of peace. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Some things are worth fighting for, even when you can't win. And sometimes, especially then, fighting is the only thing that gives victory a chance. Admiral Thomases consulted his tactical displays again, his expression growing more desperate by the moment. The Kreks vanguard is moving toward the Centauri cluster. If they take those systems, they'll control the primary hyperspace routes to the core worlds. We have perhaps 6 days before they're in position to threaten Earth itself, along with the other founding homeworlds. Then we don't have time for extended debate, Chun said firmly. I'm requesting an emergency vote on deploying human forces to establish defensive positions. Every hour we delay costs more lives. Zarakai looked around the chamber, seeing fear, confusion, and desperate hope in the faces of 100 different species. The long peace had given them prosperity and culture beyond measure, but it had also left them helpless in the face of pure aggression. The Council recognizes the urgency of the situation, she announced. All delegates in favor of authorizing human military deployment to threatened systems? The vote was unanimous. As the session dissolved into frantic planning committees and emergency communications with homeworlds. General Stone approached the central tactical display. His aide, a young lieutenant whose name tag read Murphy, joined him. "Sir," Murphy said quietly, "the 3rd Expeditionary Force is already in position near the Centauri approaches. Captain Rodriguez requests permission to begin Phase 1 operations." Stone nodded, then looked up at the swirling chaos of the council chamber. Thousands of years of peace and prosperity were about to collide with the harsh realities of war. He felt a moment of genuine sympathy for these civilizations who were about to discover what humanity had learned long ago in the Dista. Captain Elena Rodriguez had seen her share of impossible situations during her 15-year career with the Colonial Marines, but watching a Krex dreadnought emerge from hyperspace was something new even for her. The massive vessel stretched nearly 4 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with energy cannons that could crack a planet's crust. Behind it came dozens more ships, each one larger than the biggest vessels in the Empire's civilian fleet. "Contact bearing 27 Mark V, reported Sergeant Williams from his position at the sensor station. The converted asteroid they'd chosen as their base had been hollowed out in less than 48 hours, its interior now housing one of humanity's most advanced military command centers. Krex Heavy Formation, estimated strength 37 capital ships plus escorts." Rodriguez studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating vectors, weapons ranges, and timing. Around her, 40 Marines worked with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training for exactly this scenario. The other galactic species still thought in terms of grand fleets and massive battles. Humans had learned to think in terms of leverage points and asymmetric warfare. "Signal from Admiral Thomas's," Williams continued. "The Quellan Defense Fleet is requesting immediate withdrawal to the inner system. They're asking if we need evacuation assistance." "Tell the Admiral thank you, but we're exactly where we need to be," Rodriguez replied. She keyed her COM unit to the Marine frequency. "All Foxhole stations, this is actual. Krex Advance Force has arrived. Execute Plan Delta on my mark." The response came from 43 different positions throughout the asteroid. Belt a chorus of acknowledgments that represented the most unconventional defensive strategy the galaxy had ever seen. While the Empire's fleets retreated to protect core worlds, the Marines had done something that no military doctrine in recorded history recommended. They had spread out into the smallest, most vulnerable targets possible. "Ma'am," Williams said, his voice carrying a note of concern, "the Krex formation is altering course. They're moving to engage the Quellan fleet directly instead of proceeding to the hyperspace nexus." Rodriguez smiled. It was the expression of a predator who had just watched her prey make exactly the mistake she'd hoped for. "Sergeant, that's why we're going to win this war. The Krex still think like conquerors. They see a fleet, they want to destroy it. They can't resist a conventional target." She turned to face the young Marine corporal manning the communications station. "Morrison, patch me through to Major Thompson on Foxhole 7. Tell him the Krex just gave us a perfect firing solution." The tactical display showed the Krex formation spreading out into an attack formation, their heavy ships moving with the ponderous grace of predators who had never encountered effective resistance. Each dreadnought carried enough firepower to sterilize a world, and they deployed with the confidence of a force that had been winning battles for over a century. What they didn't see were the 43 hollowed-out asteroids, each one drifting in precisely calculated positions throughout the belt. To Krex sensors, they were just more space debris. The galaxy was full of dead rocks. The fact that each one contained a company of colonial marines and enough firepower to crack open a battle cruiser was beyond their comprehension. "Foxhole 7 reports ready," Morrison announced. "Major Thompson says to tell you the Krex navigation is even worse than their intelligence files suggested." "Confirmed. All foxholes execute Delta, weapons free." Across the asteroid belt, concealed launch tubes opened like flowers blooming in vacuum. The Marines had spent 2 days installing what human military planners called battlefield improvisation, taking standard mining charges and turning them into ship killers through the simple expedient of attaching guidance systems and armor-piercing warheads. The first wave of projectiles struck the Krex formation before their sensors even registered the launch signatures. Humans had learned long ago that surprise was the great equalizer in asymmetric warfare. While the galaxy had spent 5,000 years perfecting sensors and shields, humanity had spent the same time perfecting the art of not being detected until it was too late. Direct hits on the lead dreadnought, Williams reported, his voice carrying a note of amazement. Holy hell, ma'am, we just punched clean through their primary shields. That's what happens when you design your defenses for energy weapons and someone throws rocks at you, Rodriguez replied. All stations, commence Phase 2. Let's give them something to really worry about. The Krex response was swift and overwhelming. Energy beams lanced out toward the asteroid positions, vaporizing entire chunks of the belt in brilliant flashes of superheated matter. But the Marines had positioned themselves with surgical precision close enough to maintain effective fire, far enough apart that losing one position wouldn't compromise the others. Foxhole 12 is gone, Morrison reported. Direct hit from a plasma lance. No survivors. Rodriguez felt the familiar cold weight of command settle over her. 40 Marines had just died in a flash of light, good people who had trusted her judgment about this insane plan. But she also knew that their sacrifice was buying time for something the galaxy had never seen before. Signal all remaining foxholes, she ordered. Commence harassment pattern Alpha. We're not here to win a stand-up fight, we're here to make them bleed for every meter. What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The Krex had trained for centuries to engage enemy fleets in massive ship-to-ship encounters. They understood orbital bombardments and the systematic destruction of planetary defenses. What they had never encountered was an enemy that refused to present conventional targets. The Marines played a deadly game of hide and seek among the asteroids, using the belt's natural cover to mask their movements. They would appear long enough to launch a salvo of improvised missiles, then disappear before the Krex could target them effectively. Each attack was pinprick compared to the massive firepower of the dreadnoughts. But 43 pinpricks applied with precision could cripple even the largest ship. Foxhole 6 reports successful strike on target designation Kilo 7, Morrison announced. Enemy cruiser is venting atmosphere and falling out of formation. Foxhole 19 confirms kill on escort destroyer, Williams added. That's number 4 for Lieutenant Hayes. Rodriguez watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Krex formation was beginning to lose cohesion as individual ships broke off to pursue Marine positions that vanished as soon as they were targeted. It was exactly what human doctrine called controlled chaos, turning the enemy's superior firepower into a liability by forcing them to use it inefficiently. Ma'am, Morrison said, we're getting an urgent transmission from the Quellan flagship. Admiral Thomases wants to know why we're not withdrawing. He says the Krex are preparing to target our positions with concentrated fire. Tell the Admiral that's exactly what we want them to do, Rodriguez replied. Every shot they waste on empty asteroids is one less shot aimed at populated worlds. The battle continued for 6 hours, a grinding attritional engagement that tested every principle of conventional warfare. The Marines lost 19 more positions to Krex fire, but they extracted a toll that stunned the galactic observers monitoring the engagement. 7 Krex heavy cruisers were destroyed outright, with another dozen suffering critical damage. More importantly, the entire advance force was now scattered across several 100,000 cubic kilometers of space, their formation broken and their momentum lost. Captain, Williams reported, long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace signatures. Something big is jumping in at the edge of the system. Rodriguez checked her chronometer and smiled. Right on schedule? All foxholes, this is actual. Execute Phase 3, I repeat, execute Phase 3. Throughout the asteroid belt, the remaining Marine positions began moving. Each hollowed-out rock was equipped with mining thrusters, originally designed for asteroid processing but now repurposed for tactical mobility. To the Krex, it must have seemed like the very asteroids themselves had come alive. What in the name of the void are they doing? The transmission came from the Quellan flagship, Admiral Thas's voice carrying amazement and terror in equal measure. "They're repositioning for the real fight," Rodriguez replied. "Admiral, I need you to move your fleet to coordinates 77 Delta. You're about to have company." The massive hyperspace signatures resolved into the largest fleet concentration in human history. 3 full Marine Expeditionary Forces materialized at the edge of the system, over 200 ships carrying the combined might of humanity's military power. But these weren't the exploration vessels and patrol craft that made up the Empire's fleets. These were purpose-built warships, designed by a species that had never forgotten that the galaxy was a dangerous place. "General," Stone's voice echoed across all frequencies, broadcast on open channels so that every ship in the system could hear. "This is General Marcus Stone, Commanding Officer, Human Colonial Forces. To all Krex vessels, you have violated the territory of the Terran Galactic Empire and committed acts of genocide against peaceful civilizations. You are ordered to surrender immediately or face the consequences." The response from the Krex flagship was predictable. A stream of what the translation computers rendered as profanity. The main Krex battle fleet arrived like a storm made of steel and fire, their 1,000-ship formation emerging from hyperspace in perfect order. Admiral Vashtar, Supreme Commander of the Hegemony's war machine, had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of galactic conquest. He had shattered the defenses of 47 civilizations, each one falling within days of his arrival. The scattered human resistance in the asteroid belt was merely an annoyance to be swept aside before the real work began. General Stone watched the enemy deployment from the bridge of the UES Normandy, humanity's newest heavy battleship. Around him, the combined might of 3 Marine Expeditionary Forces, spread out in a formation that would have puzzled any conventional military strategist. Instead of the massive ship walls favored by traditional naval doctrine, the human fleet was arranged in dozens of smaller groups, each one positioned to maximize their tactical flexibility. "Enemy fleet composition confirmed," reported Admiral Sarachun, Stone's naval commander. 847 heavy warships, plus escorts. Total count exceeds 1,500 vessels. She paused, studying her displays. "Sir, they outnumber us 7-1. Stone nodded calmly. "About what we expected." "Admiral, signal all task forces. Execute Operation Broken Chain." The order rippled through the human fleet, and suddenly the carefully organized formation began to dissolve. Ships peeled away in all directions, some diving toward the inner system, others climbing above the orbital plane, still others scattering into the outer darkness. To the Krex, it must have looked like a rout before the battle had even begun. "This is Admiral Vashtar to the human vessels," came the broadcast on all frequencies. "Your fleet is in complete disarray. Surrender now, and I will grant you the honor of quick deaths." Stone keyed his own communicator to respond. "Admiral Vashtar, this is General Marcus Stone. I appreciate your concern for our tactical disposition, but we're exactly where we want to be. What happened next redefined. Galactic warfare for the next 10,000 years. The human ships hadn't scattered randomly. They had positioned themselves according to a 3-dimensional chess game that took into account every aspect of space combat that the Krex had never bothered to master. While traditional fleets fought in the 2-dimensional formations inherited from ancient ocean navies, humans had learned to think in true 3-dimensional terms. The first phase began when the outermost human ships opened fire not at the main Krex fleet, but at empty space behind them. The missiles they launched weren't targeting ships directly. They were targeting hyperspace exit points. As the projectiles reached their destinations, they detonated in precise patterns that created gravitational anomalies, effectively sealing off the Krex fleet's escape routes. "Impossible," Admiral Chun muttered, watching the tactical display. "They're trap mining hyperspace itself? How do we even know where to shoot?" "Because," Stone explained, "we've been watching them for 50 years. We know their standard retreat patterns, their emergency protocols, their backup escape routes. Humans have always been good at one thing: learning from our enemies. The second phase came when the Krex fleet began its advance toward the inner system. Their massive dreadnoughts moved in the stately progression that had terrified 100 worlds, confident in their overwhelming firepower advantage. What they encountered instead was something no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught. The human ships refused to fight fair. Instead of meeting the enemy advance head-on, the scattered human vessels began a series of hit-and-run attacks that exploited every weakness in the Krex formation. Ships would appear at maximum weapons range, launch a full missile spread, then vanish back into the dark before the enemy could respond effectively. Each attack was precisely timed to catch the Krex ships in vulnerable positions, turning to engage other threats, maneuvering around obstacles, or simply caught between targets. Task Force 7 reports successful strike on enemy formation Delta, Admiral Chun announced. 3 heavy cruisers destroyed, minimal damage to our forces. Task Force 3 has eliminated the enemy screening force in Sector 4, added another voice from the communications station. Captain Morrison reports his squadron is repositioning for Phase 3. But the most devastating attacks came from an entirely unexpected direction. Captain Rodriguez and her surviving Marines had continued their asteroid-based operations, turning the belt into a 3-dimensional minefield that the Krex fleet had to navigate. Every time the enemy formation tried to concentrate their firepower, they found themselves under attack from concealed positions that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. "Sir," Admiral Chun said, her voice carrying a note of amazement, "the Krex are starting to break formation. They're trying to engage individual threats, but every time they split their forces, another group of our ships hits them from a different angle." Stone nodded. This was exactly what human doctrine called systemic collapse, the moment when an enemy force's organizational structure began to fail under the stress of fighting. On too many fronts simultaneously, the third phase began when Admiral Vostar made the mistake that ended the battle. Frustrated by his inability to bring his superior firepower to bear effectively, he ordered his entire fleet to concentrate on what appeared to be the largest group of human ships near the 4th planet. "All Krex forces are moving to engage Task Force 1, Chun reported. "They're committing everything to a single assault." "Signal Task Force 1 to commence withdrawal," Stone ordered. "And Admiral?" "Begin Phase 4. What the Krex hadn't realized was that the retreat they were witnessing was actually the most sophisticated tactical maneuver in human military history. As their fleet concentrated for what they believed would be the decisive engagement, they found themselves moving into a carefully prepared killing field. The human ships that had scattered throughout the system began converging from every direction. Ships that had been hiding behind planets emerged from the shadow zones. Vessels that had appeared to flee beyond the system's edge revealed themselves to be repositioning for optimal attack angles. Even the asteroid belt contributed to the convergence. As Captain Rodriguez's Marines launched their final, coordinated strike. "Now," Stone said quietly, the convergence strike involved every human ship in the system, firing simultaneously at predetermined targets. But this wasn't the random barrage that most species would have attempted. This was the product of 50 years of studying Krex ship design, Krex tactical doctrine, and Krex psychology. Every missile, every energy beam, every projectile was aimed at critical system nodes that would create cascading failures throughout the enemy fleet. Power distribution centers, command and control networks, life support systems, weapons targeting arrays. The humans had identified 17 critical vulnerability points that existed on every Krex vessel, and they struck all 17 simultaneously across the entire enemy formation. The result was catastrophic. Within minutes, the mighty Krex fleet had been reduced to hundreds of drifting hulks. Some ships lost power completely. Others found their weapon systems offline. A few managed to maintain basic life support but lost all navigation capability. The most fortunate vessels retained enough functionality to attempt surrender. "Krex flagship is signaling," Chun reported, her voice subdued by the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. "Admiral Vostar requests terms." Stone considered for a moment. Tell him the terms are simple: immediate withdrawal of all Krex forces from Empire territory, reparations for the worlds they've destroyed, and acceptance of permanent human oversight of their military capabilities. Sir, Chun said carefully, those aren't terms of surrender. Those are terms of complete submission. Admiral, Stone replied, when someone breaks 5,000 years of peace and commits genocide against peaceful civilizations, they don't get to negotiate. They get to choose between submission and extinction. The response from the Krex flagship was swift. Admiral Vashtar, faced with the complete destruction of his fleet and the certain knowledge that he could never explain this defeat to his superiors, accepted the human terms without modification, but the real impact of the battle became clear only when the reports reached the other galactic powers. Within hours, emergency sessions were being called throughout the Empire. Within days, diplomatic delegations were en route to Earth. Within weeks, the entire structure of galactic civilization had been transformed. Ambassador Zarakai stood once again in the council chamber. But the atmosphere was entirely different from the desperate panic of just 10 days earlier. The holographic displays now showed peaceful star systems, restored communications networks, and the beginnings of reconstruction efforts. But they also showed something new: human naval patrol routes extending throughout the former conflict zones. The Council recognizes the Human Federation, she announced, Ambassador. Chun rose from what was no longer the modest delegation section near the edge of the chamber. The humans now occupied the central position traditionally reserved for the founding species of the Empire. Thank you, Madame President, Chun replied. The title was new. The Council had unanimously voted to restructure the galactic government, with a human in the executive position. The Human Federation presents its preliminary assessment of galactic security requirements, Chunko.